Greetings on behalf of the New England CCIM chapter. Welcome back. I'm Michael Chase, chapter president for 2022. As always, we'd like to kick off with a quick thank you to our annual sponsors, our gold level sponsors, Geronimo Properties and Northmark, silver level sponsors, May Property Management, and St. James Real Estate Advisors. We'd also like to mention our chapter's charitable partner for 2022, New View Communities, a CDC organization promoting affordable housing in central Massachusetts. To find out how you can become a sponsor of the New England CCIM chapter or learn more about New View Communities, please feel free to visit our websites. I will add links in the description below. Okay, so today is the second video for 2022 in our CCIM expert series, and we are pleased to be joined by Chris Norwood, a commercial broker and president at NAI Norwood Group. Chris is a CCIM and a past president of the New England CCIM chapter from 2008 and 2009. He's here today to talk about commercial real estate market in New Hampshire. Chris, thank you for joining us and your continued support of the New England CCIM chapter. Would you like to take a moment and tell us more about yourself?
Thank you, Mr. President. From one past president to another, and maybe you'll go back to that in a second. But Chris Norwood, I got my designation over a decade ago now, back when it was all in person. I think I might have had one hybrid model course, but we own and operate a commercial real estate brokerage firm here in New Hampshire. We have two offices in Bedford and in Portsmouth. My father's a CCIM. One of our other team members, Joe Mandola, is a CCIM. Andy Fleischer in our Portsmouth office is a CCIM. So the coursework is important to us. The designation is important to us, and at the end of the day, that education kind of emanates through a lot of what we do around the office for our clients.
That's great. And I know your father and some other folks in your office are also past presidents. So
that is true. That is true. But you know what? Maybe let's start there, because what a different market. I was just, when you mentioned this, 2008, 2009, during my presidency. So we'd have to go back in the Wayback Machine, but you know, when was Lehman Brothers? That was the fall of 2007, right? And then so I took presidency later that fall, probably 2 months later. And what a difference when I was going up as president-elect or vice president into presidency to that market, to this market. And when I reflect upon what was taking place at the start of the pandemic and the uncertainty we had in March and April of 2020, and I'm sure that our viewers can find a video of me forecasting on behalf of the New Hampshire Association of Realtors what I thought would take place in the pandemic. And all of that, you know, kind of disappeared, right? There was a 90-day lockdown on commercial real estate. But then things started opening back up in the fall of 20 and 21, and no one's looked back into 2022. So it was such a different time for your presidency and reflecting upon mine.
Agreed. So why don't we talk about where is the commercial real estate market in New Hampshire as we start 2022?
So very strong, right? So let's kind of high level break it up into various classes, right? Investment, clearly through the roof. I think we should revisit later in the conversation specific investment products, multifamily as it relates to New Hampshire versus Massachusetts and so forth. But in general, investments, hot, hot, hot. Industrial, hot, 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 hot. You have, some of these are older stories, but we have a former Walmart, a former BJ's getting converted from retail to warehouse, right? So that is the quintessential Amazon effect that we're referring to, right? And one of them actually became an Amazon warehouse. So there is clearly a shift of demand into industrial, not just on the distribution, but the light manufacturers are all doing quite well as in addition to that. Industrial. So then let's shift. Now we talk about not as hot, but still doing pretty well as retail. And I would say it's mostly smaller retail that we've seen really excelling. You know, the big boxes, they're either already in place, and if they're not already in place, they're moving a little bit slower. But on the small side, everyone from the banks to even the service related industry that, I thought was going to take more of a hit in the pandemic is all rebounded quite well in New Hampshire. Restaurants are still a little touch and go with what's going on with Omicron, but I think that most restaurateurs are taking the long view. And finally, office. And because office is last, that does not mean it's in the caboose going terribly. It's softened. And I think that if anyone tries to use bolder words to describe the demise of the office environment, I think it's a little too much. It's taken a hit. I'm not arguing that, but it's not a full outright gorging, I think, as some may have predicted.
Interesting. So we've certainly touched on the four main food groups of the commercial real estate asset classes. Are you finding any particular trends in some of the alternative asset classes out there, such as self-storage or data centers, or are you seeing any opportunities emerging in some of those spaces?
Yeah, I think that you certainly see self-storage as an asset class that is to be desired. There are still new projects getting developed and permitted. I can think of at least 3 or 4, no, probably 5 or 6 that are either in the permitting process or under construction in Hillsborough and Rockingham County. So there continues to be steady growth in that particular market segment. I think when you talk about additional other market segments, New Hampshire's a hospitality state. There's, we get a lot of our rooms and meals tax. We don't see a lot of data center type product. Some limited, but really it's much more on the manufacturing, distribution. Those are the stronger food groups in the kind of the alternative products.
Great. And certainly it was a strong market to finish 2021. It sounds as if it's a strong market continuing into 2022. Are there any trends that you see that could be changing as we're getting on into 2022?
I think from a huge high level perspective nationwide, right? I'm on the board of the New Hampshire Housing Finance Authority, and for investors and for occupants of multifamily product, a lot of folks have received a lot of rental assistance through distribution channels. In New Hampshire, it's called the ERAP, Emergency Rental Assistance Program. Other states may have different acronyms, but a lot of states, some states have already used up those funds. Other states have a lot of funds left to go. The question becomes, when those funds expire, what happens to those renters? And I think that what I've talked with industry experts who say that, what will likely happen is we may see an uptick in evictions, or we may see some slight softening of multifamily. And again, I don't want to speak in hyperbole. These are going to be marginal changes. Obviously, for folks that get evicted, it's a huge change for them when they run out of those rental assistance dollars. But from the investment side of things, the changes may only be nominal. We saw very little very little increase in evictions in the state of New Hampshire when the federal eviction moratorium ran out. And I think that was in part because of all of the stimulus funds that are still working through the system.
Great. And how is New Hampshire looking at things such as the infrastructure bill or other stimulus package that those funds are going to be starting to matriculate through the system? Are there any projects or things that you're seeing New Hampshire kind of lining up to address with those funds?
I don't think that there's been anything earmarked from a large infrastructure project. Clearly some of the big projects that have taken place in the last decade, you have all the work that's been done around the Manchester Airport and the industrial park on Pettingill Road, the widening of 93. These were all huge projects that took years in the making. On a more local basis, again, going back to housing and multifamily, we believe that there'll be some monies earmarked for multifamily, which will be a huge boon. Listen, New Hampshire needs more housing. And so if there are developers who are listening to this, we need you to come to the Granite State. We are very, very undersupplied. And that's something that we'll continue to struggle with as we kind of work through those stimulus funds.
So you talked about development. Are you seeing in New Hampshire supply chain issues or labor shortages being any kind of headwind to new development?
Yeah, I think that there are some developers who hedged against this, and some were very wise, pre-buying steel, pre-buying other building materials. But there's no question it's had an impact. I think more local to New Hampshire, you could talk about the regulatory environment. To make a very long story short for your viewers, if any developer is working on a parcel and is disturbing more than 2 acres roughly of land in the state of New Hampshire, you basically have to go to Concord, and every department gets to weigh in: DOT, Fish and Game, Wildlife, et cetera. It's called an alteration of terrains permit. And again, not to get too far in the weeds, but during the pandemic, as a result of something different from the pandemic, it was actually a court case. There was basically a roadblock put on the alteration of terrain permits. So for any developer who's out there, who's watching this, talk to your civil engineer, talk to your legal team, find out about where New Hampshire is in the process, because that could be, an extra 6 months added to your time frame, running concurrently with site-specific approval. Don't get me wrong, but still, it can be a long time to get those AOT permits.
Great tip to point out. Thank you. You're so involved in so many organizations up there, and also with an ear on legislative matters. Is there any other things on the legislative docket in New Hampshire that could impact commercial real estate?
So one of the things that's kind of unique about New Hampshire is you have a legislative body that I believe it is the second largest democratically elected legislative body in the world. I think it's just second behind like Australia, I want to say. But it's the huge House of Representatives, huge Senate, and they all get paid $100 plus we pay for their tolls. I believe that's it. So because of that, because we have such a large legislative body, there are a lot of bills that come out. And I will say, not to create a lot of hyperbole again, most of these bills all the bills will get a hearing, but most won't end up getting signed into law. One bill that's interesting for our Massachusetts viewers, there's a bill out there to allow municipalities in New Hampshire to segregate residential and commercial tax assessments, right? Or having believe they manipulated by saying a different tax rate, maybe not assessment value. So wouldn't that be interesting? And what would that look like in New Hampshire? And clearly it's not something I'm personally supportive of, but those are the types of concepts that come out there. A lot of bills dealing with tenant and landlord issues relative to multifamily properties. So you have conversations surrounding what constitutes the end of a tenancy for eviction purposes. Other bills out there dealing with some things like whether or not pets are allowed, and is that a right that should be affirmed to tenancies in a multifamily property. So not as much directly affecting the CRE environment. There are always water bills, wetland bills that need to be cautious of. What constitutes a prime wetland in the state of New Hampshire? There's a bill before the House in regards to that right now. A lot of bills dealing with, I'm not going to pronounce it, but the PFAS chemicals, petroflora, something.
Plastics.
Right. Thank you. Very, very dangerous materials. And they're around all of our airports. There's a big project down in Merrimack, the St. Cobain plant. And there's a lot of bills dealing with disclosure and private wells, and in what role does the state have in regulating and monitoring and testing. So suffice to say, if you own commercial property in New Hampshire or are looking to, alterations of terrains permit, look at your groundwater, think about, does it have PFAS, and what impact does that have if you are not otherwise on municipal water? And then finally, just take a keen eye into those setbacks off of vernal pools and the fingers off of vernal pools, because even if this legislation doesn't pass this year, there's always bills around those same topics year in and out.
And I think that you make a great point, Chris, because just again, from a 10,000 foot level nationally, or the ASTM standards have been changed and implemented now for environmental reporting. And I believe that part of those ASTM standards has been, is going to be a new look at things such as water quality and PFAS going forward. So I think it's going to be a concern for commercial property owners everywhere to keep in mind on water. How about environmental? Are there any incentives for environmental improvements and making environmental efficiencies or requirements to be more environmentally efficient in your properties?
So I'm not going to get into the details too much on this one because there was a big debate up at the State House no more than 30, 60 days ago about whether or not to keep the local utility plan there's a program where essentially ratepayers paid a premium, but you could tap into those dollars as an individual property owner, residential or commercial, to get efficiencies, insulation, windows, better bulbs, etc. The question came into whether or not that that program should continue. And it was hotly debated. And again, I do not know the details of the outcome, so I don't want to lead anyone astray. But you're right, New Hampshire doesn't have a ton of money to throw at those programs. And the programs that we do have are hotly debated. So it's well worth our viewers looking into that. Solar is another one, Michael, where there's always a debate year in and year out about net metering and what is the appropriate governmental cap on the amount of power one can put back into the grid. And again, without leading anyone astray, New Hampshire's constantly in that debate, constantly worth your viewers checking out if that's the product they're into.
We've spent some time on this discussion talking about legislative matters and things. And correct me if I'm wrong, but New Hampshire has a biannual legislator. So
Correct.
Is 2022 one of the years that they're in session?
So no, biannual in that they serve for a 2-year term, but they are in session both years. There's some quirky rules relative to whether or not they can bring back a bill that had been put forth last year, or they just change a word and then it's basically the same bill. But yeah, we're going into to election season.
Great. So what are some of the things that you're advising your clients on in the commercial real estate space for the upcoming year?
I think that right now, probably a surprise to no one is the interest rate environment. Lock it in while you can. My wife and I just refinanced our home. I think probably like a lot of viewers, if you have an ability to do so, grab those low interest rates. Likewise on commercial real estate, I was having a great conversation yesterday with a client of mine who basically was saying, owning the property, even if there's a premium paid on it, what is the hedge against inflation, knowing that I have a rate lock on my interest rate for 5-10 years versus leasing and the inflationary risks there. So it's a debate that's obviously, as every CCIM knows, it's hard to talk in macro. You got to talk specific for your client. But it was a great discussion that I had with him, and we kind of just went through cost benefit analysis, right? Lease versus own, I think CI 104, and kind of talking about that discounted rate. So you're never without your pen. I mean, physically, I don't have it on me now, but I think you know what I mean. You carry that analysis with you where you go. And I think that in 2022, rate lock is going to be the name of the game if you can get it.
Interesting. Thank you. So any parting thoughts that you have in terms of the commercial real estate market in New Hampshire?
So I think New Hampshire's very strong right now. I think that, again, the reports, what's that? Is that, I'm trying to remember the quote. The reports of my demise have been greatly exaggerated. Again, office is going to soften a bit. I have some questions about the large office tenancies. If you own a campus, if you're a tenant who owns a campus somewhere with several 100,000 square feet, what does your back to office program look like? But I don't think we've seen the wholesale demise of that. And there has been conversions, by the way, from office towers to residential in Manchester. But I'd let our viewers know that a lot of those were planned and permitted well before the pandemic. So again, don't take those cases to say, well, look what the pandemic did. No, those developers were looking ahead and seeing that housing was more lucrative than office space in 2019, before we knew what Delta and Omicron were. And I'd say, listen, I know that this is not a New Hampshire thing. I just rediscovered some of the ward classes and really cool stuff. I encourage everyone to go back. I saw a couple ones for, like $100, $200, and some great programming you can take online at your leisure, and well worth it to keep the pin polished.
That's great. And a great lead into kind of my final question is, what can the New England CCIM chapter do to support professionals and companies like yourself?
I think that these forums are great. I'm really looking to get back in person. Personally scheduling, I've got 4 daughters at home. It's hard for me to get in person, but Zoom's great, and Zoom served a wonderful purpose. But yeah, I'm looking forward to toasting a beer with you and others who I haven't seen in years at this point, face to face. And I think at the right point, it will be great to do that, maybe in an outdoor environment. God, I hope we can do it this year, Michael.
We are too. We have a lot of great programming that we have on the docket and plans, and much of that counts on hopefully being able to get beyond some of the most recent outbreaks and do some in-person networking and events in the upcoming year. But Chris, I want to thank you for taking the time to chat with us today and sharing your insights. And thank you for taking the time to view this video. You can follow Chris on LinkedIn and connect with him there, or through the NAI Norwood Group website. I'll include links in the description below. We have a great lineup of speakers coming, and we'll be posting more content throughout the year. So please like and subscribe and keep an eye on our channel. Also, feel free to follow us on LinkedIn and other social media platforms. Thank you for viewing.